Good evening and welcome to International House and to the University of Chicago. Thank you all for coming out on this snowy evening, yet another snowy evening. We're pleased to co-sponsor tonight's program along with the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and the International House Global Voices program. The Global Voices program sponsors a wide range of programs throughout the academic year. We invite you to come back for future programs. I'll just draw your attention to a program coming up tomorrow night, which is part of our Author Night series, when we will present Saul Levmore and Martha Nussbaum from the law school here at the University of Chicago, speaking on their latest book, The Offensive Internet. That's at 6 p.m. here at International House. Tonight, I'd like to invite Farouk Mustafa, the Ibn Rushd Professorial Lecturer of Arabic in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. To start the program, he's going to moderate our discussion this evening. We've had a slight change of order of our speakers, but we're glad Farouk is here and he's going to moderate this most interesting discussion. So thank you all for coming. Farouk?
Thank you, Denise. And I'd like to thank the International House and Denise for her energetic program that brings you away from your cozy and warm homes and halls to listen to something that we hope might shed some light on what's happening in Tahrir Square in Egypt. And I would not speak right at the beginning. I'd just like to introduce the panelists. And from the left, that's always a good start.
It's actually the right from the
Ahmed
speaker.
El-Shamsy. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Don't reveal your colors so soon. Professor Ahmed El-Shamsy. He's professor of Islamic thought at the University of Chicago. He's just started out here, and we have really put on quite a reception for him, snow-wise. And Tom Maguire, he is the associate director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago, and he has a background in the media. He has a PhD actually in media studies, and he has worked for a number of years, months, weeks, many weeks, in Cairo with the information media. And to my right, my very old friend, no, she's not very old, Noha, Abul Majd Forster. She specializes in early 20th century Sufi brotherhoods and things like that.
Kind of.
We don't need Sufism now. We just need somebody to tell a certain Mr. Mubarak to just leave, please.
I'd be happy to do that.
You'd be happy to do that. And next to her is my old friend also, Muhammad Eissa. He's a graduate of Al-Azhar University, has a PhD on medieval history, and I do modern literature and language, and I'm just a man about campus. I just come and go as they tell me where to go. So I'd like to start with Ahmed. Let's agree on about 5 to 7 minutes maximum. And please hold your applause and your questions until everybody has had a chance to finish. And then I'm sure there will be enough opportunity for everybody to say what they think. So, Ahmed is also half Egyptian. I mean, this is, so he has the genes, so to speak.
Okay, so what I would like to start with is a view that is actually not focused on Maidan al-Tahrir in Cairo, but rather a view from the outside, from the marginal regions, marginal in the sense that these are the kind of regions which you do not hear, certainly not in American media, but you wouldn't even hear about it on, let's say, on Al Jazeera. So a large, significant part of my family actually comes from the Nile Delta, from the rural areas, and I thought it might be interesting to give you a view from about the current situation from there. Before that, I want to start with a little bit of self-praise. I think it's such an important moment. One also has to give credit where credit is due. I actually already predicted this uprising to happen. I already predicted that in 1992. Then I predicted it to happen in 1993, so there's some problem with the timing, but Bertolt Brecht actually once remarked that there is an inexplicable patience of the people with regards to their government. So it was only, well, at the end of the day, it really was a question of time. How did I experience this? The last time I was in Egypt was in October. I was busy with other things. I certainly didn't notice any revolutionary mood then. But what I've noticed over the last couple of years, and here I'm going to trespass into an area that Tom is going to talk about, is through Facebook, basically, a kind of daily connection I had with people, even in the village. Today that might be sounding normal, but in our village until the early 90s we didn't even have telephone. But today, certainly, like all people in the kind of 18 to 25 bracket, which make up more than 50% of the Egyptian population. So everyone between, even from 16 onwards in my village who's related to me is my Facebook friend. So. That doesn't mean that I have particular insights into their lives, but I can certainly see what they are posting, and that has really surprised me in the last couple of years. The first thing I noticed is the appearance of something like a parallel news media world that is built from really the grassroots. So people posting videos about something that happened to them. And very often, these are videos of police brutality. So I think it was about a year ago, I saw a video of police firing into a crowd in Abu Hummus. I've heard of that before. It was actually a small village that grew into a little town in the Nile Delta. And people just posted that on their Facebook walls. This is something that kind of really surprised me, because Egypt is a country that has a very well managed state propaganda machine that works very efficiently, and they have a security apparatus. Security, of course, is a misnomer here. A surveillance apparatus that is, I guess, similar to what we've seen in Eastern Germany. To give you an example, in my village, 10 years ago when I was there, they built a new mosque. It was the second mosque in our village. And it was the first mosque that had a large women's area where the women could pray. And a few months after it was opened, the state security sent a letter to the administration of the mosque saying that this women's area had to be closed because they didn't have the manpower or the woman power for surveillance of this women's area, so they wouldn't know what was going on there. I.e., in the men's area, they obviously have their people. I mean, it's not very subtle, but certainly there is this constant threat of surveillance. And what I realized was that on this Facebook level, this kind of semi-private, semi-public level, people were very free to post these little videos that showed all kind of human rights abuses. Then, of course, last year, one of the big stories was the killing of Khalid Saeed in Alexandria, which is only 60 kilometers away, as a young man. Again, what he did was he had videoed 2 policemen doing something illegal. He had put it on Facebook, and they tracked him down, and they beat him to death in public. So that was something that suddenly, like all the profile pictures of my relatives in the village, turned to the face of this Khalid Saeed before even I had heard the story about him. That is kind of something that surprised me, both the kind of courage that they would do that, but also the kind of viral nature of these things suddenly taking off, even in the kind of stereotypically least politicized area of the country. And then just at the very turn of this year, there was a bomb attack on a Coptic church in Alexandria again, and within 2 or 3 days, every one of my friends had there are different forms, but I'm sure you've seen them as well. An image that is intertwined, a cross and a crescent as their profile picture. So making political statements by Facebook. So these are the kind of things that surprised me. And then what we saw afterwards is kind of spontaneous demonstrations in front of churches in support of Copts. That was for the Orthodox Christmas on the 6th of January. So you have actually demonstrations that are not state-sponsored. You have to understand that since 1967, there's an emergency law in Egypt that is only lifted in the late 70s for a few months, but really in force since 1967, that limits the freedom of the press, the freedom to congregate, to demonstrate, and that gives the state power to censor the media. And so this alternative realm in which people felt free to exchange ideas and challenge this alternative reality. I mean, state media is so wacky in Egypt. Like recent day news in the national newspaper was that tens of people had demonstrated against the government. Tens of people. Apparently millions had demonstrated for Mubarak. I mean, this is the kind of reality you're confronted with that totally goes against your own experience. And this gulf, I think, was breached through the power of new media. Just to give you a short update about what is happening in that area right now, the latest news I heard was that after the demonstrations on Friday, 10 days ago, in the regional capital, Damanhur, there were demonstrations of at least 100,000 people. The headquarters of the ruling party of the NDP was burned down. The headquarters of the fire services was burned down as well, because during the demonstrations, fire engines had been used to run down demonstrators, and several people were killed. The latest news today, I spoke to my father, and he said that the headquarters of the Central Security Service had been turned into a museum. You can go there and you can. It says a sign there, entry free. You can actually go there, and people are visiting there to revisit the place, or to visit the place where people have been tortured. Right? So the place, until 10 days ago, people were still scared. I mean, if you know Damanhur, Maidan al-Sa'a, it's the central square. It's a big villa on the side with fences around. That's where people were brought to be interrogated and tortured. Now people go there and are not scared anymore. And this is kind of, I think this is I mean, if we can talk about revolution at this time already, then that's the revolution that has happened, revolution in the heads of people, that they're not scared anymore. And that from building these small virtual islands in which they can exchange themselves freely, they are now actually openly able to disagree and congregate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now Tom will speak for 5 minutes?
5 minutes. I'll do my best. Well, as Farouk said, my distinction of being the honorary Egyptian on the panel tonight is due to my experience of working with media, working in satellite television, specifically in Egypt. So really all I want to talk about is some of my own experiences working in media and also raise some of the ongoing questions about the nature of new media, social media, and how it is impacting the current situation and how it may continue to impact the future. When I worked in Egypt in satellite television 2005, 2006, I worked for a independent Islamic satellite channel called Huda TV. And this phenomenon in itself was quite new and in many ways quite revolutionary. 15 or 20 years ago, state media was really almost the only option when it came to sort of news or information programming. And satellite television was considered quite revolutionary in changing that. When I went to Egypt in 2004 and first started researching satellite television, I started to feel that the media landscape there was actually in many ways more diverse than our own television selection here in the United States, because satellite television offers such a wide variety of programming, national channels from across the region, independent news channels like Al Jazeera, Western channels like BBC or CNN. So there's really an enormous variety. And the channel where I worked was in many ways a part of this. In the past, the idea of an independent religious channel operating in Egypt would have been in many ways unthinkable. And yet in this era of satellite television, this was sort of allowed to happen. That said, very often there's a tendency to kind of celebrate new media in a way that doesn't necessarily recognize some of the ongoing limitations that exist within the media system. And certainly that was the case for us. The channel where I worked pretty much defined itself as apolitical. Part of that was essentially a policy decision that reflected probably a more quietist view of sort of religious activism in politics, but it was also a very practical decision, understanding that there was a very clear limitation on what we were or what we expected to be permitted to talk about. And in fact, the only kind of censorship that really occurred, and this very often is effective as censorship, is self-censorship. So when we were working in the channel, some of the programs that I hosted were probably venturing more into political grounds than other programs. I very much had to be aware of what topics were discussed, how they were discussed, what kind of guests were on the program, how I interacted with guests. And this was a constant sort of reminder of the presence of the state. The channel where we worked was produced at Media Production City in Egypt, was essentially an institution that's controlled by the state. There was certainly a sense of surveillance. When you walk in the building, there's a security presence. There's a picture of Mubarak on the wall. There was certainly a lack of privacy in doing, in terms of your personal privacy in relationship to your speech working in satellite television. So you knew that if you said something, you could be identified, you could potentially be tracked down, and this was certainly more true even for this sort of sense of concern was more true for Egyptians than it was for me, because as an American, you are granted certain liberties, I guess you could say, even in Egypt. So the question then becomes, with this new media revolution that we're discussing, obviously it's an instance of very substantive change, but it's also worth thinking about some of the ways that the existing control systems may try to subvert it, co-opt it, or affect it in another way. So when looking back at the time when I worked in satellite TV, in many ways it seems almost quaint. And in some ways it could even be described as the old media of today, because of the profound change that has occurred with social media, Facebook and Twitter, and the profound decentralization of media production, where it really reaches down to the individual citizen level, and the ease with which that media production can be disseminated. So these are very significant substantive changes that are occurring with social networking. At the same time, however, social networking also carries with it an enormous capacity for surveillance, the same kind of lack of privacy that would exist with satellite television, and certainly, as the case was mentioned earlier, people who do use the social networking have the risk of being identified. Many of the people who are protesting now in Tahrir Square have said if we leave Tahrir Square, we will be hunted down one by one because their presence has been made known through social networking. So it remains a question of the extent to which this new media will endure as a mechanism for empowering these kind of movements. So some of the questions that remain, I think, that I just sort of want to leave you with, I certainly don't have any answers to these, but one is how powerful is new media in relation to existing institutions of power, the state media, the state security mechanisms of control. The next question, which builds on something mentioned previously, is the idea of, is there a critical mass of participation that has developed now, where so many people are using media, so many people are resisting, that it has fundamentally changed the game and changed the relationship with the state? And at the same time, does the visibility of social media and the visibility that this media has brought internationally to the situation in Egypt, will that in itself provide a measure of protection for activists who are dealing with a state that now at least has to pay lip service to the idea of freedom of expression? And again, will the kind of movement that is instigated by this new social media be able to endure? There have been instances in the past few years where social media organizing took place in Egypt, and the state was very capable of co-opting it, of identifying the main organizers, of using the sort of usual repression tactics. So while this is on a completely different scale, what's going on, it remains an open question, I think, of how it will endure. So with that, I will leave you to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Tom. And now it's Noha's turn to enlighten us.
I hope. Okay.
I'll save myself until the end and raise the points that have not been raised. But, yeah.
And I think it seems that all of us are talking from a personal perspective, and so I'm going to go with that. But as I would urge you during the question and answer session, if you have some concrete questions, because there's just too much information. I didn't know where to begin. In fact, I think I'm feverish from all of the websites I've looked at and all of the articles I've read. So my organizational status right now is pretty chaotic. I think I'll start with the fact that this panel was in the form of a question. What is this that we're witnessing? I think it's too early to call it a revolution. I'm crossing my finger that it will be a political revolution, because that's totally necessary, I think, and I think that's basically why the people are marching. I think a lot of people were trying to, in the process of trying to understand what it was, thought that it might be an economic revolution of the poor. I think it's very important to look at the people closely who are on these, I don't even need to go to YouTube. People who call me from Egypt and people who are my Facebook friends, like Professor El-Shamsy said, come from all different classes. So this is not, it's very important to know that it's not a haves, have-not kind of a revolution, although, of course, it has a very strong economic underpinning. So I would say that it is a revolution on many different levels. What we're waiting with bated breath to see is, will it pan out to be a true political revolution? The way I would define a true political revolution, given that we, since, for the last 2 centuries, Egypt has had only 2 regimes, actually. From 1805 till 1952, we had a dynasty, a monarchical dynasty, after which we had a military dictatorship, right? Would you call it a military rule of the authoritarian type? And that continues from 1952 to the present. I mean, think about it. From 1952 to the present, the United States had 12 presidents. We only had 3, right? And
4.
Naguib?
If you count Naguib. Yeah.
Okay, but Naguib was a figure. Oh, by the way, speaking of Naguib, when we had the revolution in 1952, he was 52 years old. And the reason he was put forward as a figurehead is because he was deemed old. Now, the current leader of Egypt is a good 30 years older than that, and he thinks he's young. So, I mean, he was set on becoming president for yet another term, and it was a big concession on his part to decide not to run at the age of, what would it be, 84 by then?
To claim that he will not run.
That's
We're not
right.
sure.
That's right. That's why we're crossing our finger that it would be a political revolution. But I'd like to talk about the the things that kind of stood out for me, the moments of kind of catharsis is how I would describe them. I'm Egyptian. I live here. I've lived here for over 20 years, but I'm still Egyptian, actually. I don't have an American passport. I'm in the process, and I really hope I'm not jeopardizing it in any way by something that I say today. But,
no.
Yeah, but...
we'll take you.
So I wish so. Every year, though, I go to Egypt at least once. So I'm psychically connected to the place, and physically I go there at least once a year. And I must say, Egyptians love their country generally, and they're sentimental actually about it. And recently, though, there's been an impatience with that kind of voicing that kind of opinion, where you say, oh, you know, we have this saying in Arabic, Masr ad-dunya, you know, Egypt or Cairo is the mother of the world, and then you'd actually get clobbered if you said that these days. What are you talking about? Are you silly? This is a country like a mother who eats its children. So there was a kind of malaise, I think, like Professor Shamsi indicated. And that was very disappointing to see that, to see a tremendous polarization culturally. I think this revolution might have a personal influence on me in that I might actually finish my PhD dissertation because it has a chapter called Whose Egypt Is It? Because in the process of doing my own field work, I realized that this is not one country. It's totally two countries, and they look at each other as two countries. So coming back to Midan al-Tahrir, to Tahrir Square, which, by the way, has great personal resonance for me because this was my playground for 4 years. This is... if you had seen it before the demonstrations, it's actually a lovely spot in Cairo with a vibrant cultural life all around it. You all know the museum is there, the Nile is within walking distance. The Hilton, where me and all my siblings got married, you know, is there. The Mogamma, which is not a lovely place, but it's a place that's familiar to many people. So it's a very personal space. It's a very familiar space for us.
And there you see.
I totally forgot, of course. It was my playground because I was there for 4 years as a student, yes, at American University in Cairo. So to go back to Tahrir Square, when I was watching videos, I've been watching, I think as any Egyptian who's in the audience or on the panel has been, we were kind of feverish from lack of sleep because of that. An amazing catharsis happening on the cultural level. First of all, we saw women and men marching together. And I was observing comportment. I mean, I'm a historian, but I do anthropology, and I'm into noticing how people comport themselves, so bear with me. But the fact that women can go among men and not have the body language of somebody who's trying to efface themselves was quite amazing. I mean, I have a whole set of photos of amazingly powerful looking women. This doesn't happen overnight, and I think it's important when we look at the developing world. Sometimes we say, oh, it'll take them a couple of generations to overcome whatever it is that they're suffering from. Actually, these things are latent. They're not dead, and it doesn't take it takes something very specific to bring it out, but it doesn't take a long time. And I think this is the interesting aspect of what we're observing now, that it's a sudden kind of thing. I can speak about the background if you care to ask during the question and answer period. How did this happen? How did it start? But so women are on the streets, full force. My sisters called me from the demonstrations. It was really amazing to technology that you were mentioning, Tom. They just brought it alive for me. I could hear the chants in the background. Women taking over the public space. The unity of Muslim and Christian that we hope will continue, because that was the natural and the default of our society for 1,500 years. We hope that, especially in the wake of what happened on the New Year. So I think maybe, I don't know if you know that during the prayer, the people would symbolically make the gesture of, well, sometimes also they needed, of making a human shield around those who were praying. So the Muslims would do it around the Christians, and the Christians would do it around the Muslims. My sister saw actually, and I saw this on a YouTube video as well, a totally veiled woman, even with the face veiled, holding a sign saying, "We want a secular state." there was a man who looked to me on one of the videos like a typical Muslim brother. They have a particular kind of beard. And he was speaking in English, and he was yelling, and he was just totally into it. And he was saying, I don't care if you're Muslim, I don't care if you're Christian, I don't care if you're atheist. This is your time to regain your rights, and so on. So there was, I think what I was happy about was to see that polarities that I thought were going to take generations to get rid of had suddenly transformed themselves overnight. A last example of this, all of us, Egyptians and non-Egyptians, when we go to Egypt, we say, what a beautiful country. We just wish it was cleaner. Why are people littering on the streets? And I think anybody would probably surmise that this is happening because when people don't have a sense of belonging to the space, so people's homes are clean, but their public spaces don't belong to them. And I think the video that really got to me was the one where teenage and young men were rolling up their pants and going, and I imagine it's rather cold now, and cleaning the streets with water in their bare feet. And that is a very meaningful act to kind of, how do you say, take over once again, reclaim the physical country itself. It's very meaningful, and it's, my sister also pointed out, I think you saw how sardine-like those demonstrations were. They're incredibly claustrophobic. And she said, no man touched her. We have been suffering, I think some of you know, from sexual harassment in the streets. So it was a time and it was a moment for people to be at their best behaviors. And so on a political level, I think for this to sustain itself and to become something endemic and something part and parcel of daily life and the texture of daily life in Egypt, I think it has to be crowned with a decent system at the top. And I fear very much the kinds of negotiations that are kind of sapping at the energy of this populist movement at the moment. And I really hope. I really hope that the people will persevere, so that the over 300 that we know to be dead, have not died in vain. And I would say, too, just in a historical context, this has been, I would say, bloodier than the revolution we had in 1952, which is supposed to be the white revolution. So yes, there have been, and there are some very, very disturbing videos of how these people died. They need not have died because they were peaceful demonstrators. There was no reason for them to die. But again, it's part and parcel of who this regime is, and it helps you understand why they're there every single day. And let's hope that this all bears fruit.
Inshallah. Thank you, Noha. Faddal.
I hope you hear me. I think I have the privilege of being the oldest in the group, and the oldest maybe among the audience as well, to remember as a kid jumping on one of those tanks in 1952 in Abdeen Palace. So the scene that they have seen in Tahrir Square was exactly poking me the same way, the same feeling that I had when I was so rejoiced jumping on a tank. I had never seen a tank in my life at that age, and that was just hearing that walking from my home, which was about 45 minutes away from Abdeen Palace, to go, because I heard on the radio there was a revolution. I didn't know anything at that time what a revolution meant, or what a coup meant, or what an army is, but I knew that there is something big happening. So that scene in Tahrir Square brought a whole memory to a feeling of a kid. When I watch kids in that Tahrir Square today, I remember in 70 years later what they would say. I hope they will not be in that position to talk about another revolution. They'll be living in a peaceful life, not the life we said. As an Egyptian, I maintained my relation with Egypt. I've been in Egypt all my life, and I worked in Egypt in different levels. I graduated from a university that had the basic Egyptian people studying in that. Studying religion, yes, but I worked at the American University in Cairo. Coming to America, you still don't really, Egypt doesn't leave you. being over 30 years in the United States, you have that feeling that you belong to Egypt, because last December, for example, when I go for work and I go for seeing family and talking to family there, and nobody would ever believe that they left Egypt, because when I go there, as if I never was away. Because many people who go abroad come back with an accent in their Arabic, and I'm glad that it's my bread and butter to teach Arabic. So if I had an accent, I wouldn't be hired. So I try to maintain my language. So on a personal note, that's exactly how I felt when I heard that. And thanks to the snow that closed the university for how many days that we were already glued, if there was no snow reason, I would use any other reason for not coming to work, because I wanted to see what's going on. And the bombardment, and I have people here sitting in the audience who have been sending 10 messages a minute, and they're forwarding things coming from all over. It's not only from Egypt. Comments, videotapes, that makes you feel as if you are there. In fact, I wake up, if I did have sleep, and I don't know whether the snow is in Tahrir Square or in Millennium Park. And I think that the demonstration is in Millennium Park. I really don't know exactly where I am, because I'm so immersed in the media. The media is covering everything, and I have 2 computers, each one is on a channel and a TV, and so on. You see that. But what exactly is happening? How I would like to address an aspect here that may have not been addressed. When Egyptians live abroad and see their country from a distance, in that situation, what do you feel? I have an American passport, yes, and I say to people that if you are in America and you are an American citizen with origins somewhere else, you are American. And you have to really be sure that being American provides you with the privilege and right to speak your mind in such a way you don't have that right in the country of origin. But you cannot help being an American from Egyptian origin feeling frustrated. Whom I defend, whom I sympathize with. Is it the American political system that tells me something? And as a loyal American, I should really listen to my system? Or at least I have the privilege of, in America, to disagree with the government. But as an Egyptian, I was all my life deprived of that life. When I see people having that life, having that freedom that I've never experienced in Egypt, I was always scared of any policeman in the street. When I came to America, my kids had more courage to talk to the policeman in the street. And when I see a policeman in the street in America, when I came first, I just think of the image of a policeman in Egypt, and I would really avoid having anything to do with them. But kids who grew up here, they have different perspective on life. Now I can see, I was listening to the latest interview with Wael Ghunaim, who was arrested and detained for 12 days, and he was saying something so moving that he said, after they released him, he sat with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Interior, which is the most horrible and most frightening personality in Egypt, because he is the one who controls the police power, the brutal police power. He was sitting with him across from each other, and he was consoling. The Minister of Interior was consoling him. Whenever, if you said that to an Egyptian 2 weeks ago, they would never believe you. They would think that you are dreaming. What do you think? Because you're American, you think that this can happen in Egypt? You know nothing about Egypt. Now, when you hear it from someone who was detained and accused and being interrogated and being tortured and being released and sitting with the Minister of Interior face to face, and the Minister of Interior is consoling him and apologizing to him, this has never been a public speech, public claim to make. So now the situation, I know that we have so much really to address this, whether this revolution or not revolution, whether something is coming out of it. whether people who are in Tahrir Square now have legitimate right to stay, or what can they gain out of that. These are questions that are legitimately raised. But from a personal point of view, when I talk to my family, and every day I talk to them, we go on Skype, of course, if there is internet, and I see some of them are reluctant to really do anything because they still live under fear. So there is a difference between when you talk here, when we are sitting here and talking about the events there, and people there talking about their own country. When they talk, they are so scared and afraid. They say, well, I think the man gave them more than what was expected, because they are sitting afraid to go in the street. Then you listen to the other side from Tahrir Square and see how humorous they are, how much fun they are having, and they are doing so wonderfully well. Then you see, no, who is right? People in the homes now talking about that's enough now, let's go and have our business as usual, or people who are sitting in the square wanting to have, it will be a great dismay and defeat if these people leave without their objectives is not realized. So I will leave the serious questions to you, but just I wanted to share with you the personal feeling and the scene from there. If you go and really, you finish your midterms for the students and just go and spend the rest of the quarter watching TV and YouTube, and you will be really shocked to see how this is yes, it's a revolution in a sense. It's peaceful. And the example Noha used, really, that brought tears to my eyes, because I always complain when I go to Egypt that people don't even take care of the space in front of their own apartments. They don't clean it. They think it is public domain and it doesn't belong to us. They clean their own apartments. When I see people cleaning the streets, it is the symbolic thing. They are claiming back the country. It is our country. We got to clean it because now it is ours. That symbolic feeling, in fact, opens so many doors for people to feel that Egypt now, Egypt after 25th of January, is a different Egypt. And we'll leave the rest for you guys to raise.
Thank you very much, Professor Eissa. I just want to mention a few points, and I'll number them so that let's all remember that this is one of the most corrupt regimes on the face of the earth. I mean, and all the Egyptian people know that. Point number two, Egypt is extremely important in the Arab world and in the Middle East. And if it goes the way we hope it will go, i.e., if it frees itself from this horrible police state, corrupt dictatorship, the Middle East will be different. It will not end with Egypt. We might hear about Jordan, we might hear about Syria. Who knows, we might even hear about Saudi Arabia and some of the oil-producing countries, because the same kinds of polarization that's taking place in Egypt is very endemic there. The third thing is the regime has been supported mainly financially and physically by us, the taxpayers of this country. We have been giving Egypt some financial aid as a reward for the peace with Israel. And I can say, as an Egyptian, as an American, that the Egyptian people would not suffer if this financial aid is stopped. The military might suffer, the Mubarak family might suffer, but not the Egyptian people. Third or fourth, I'm losing track of the numbers, the the big bugaboo that they frighten us with, the Muslim Brotherhood, is really a minority force in Egypt. If fair and honest elections are done today, they might get about 20% of the popular vote. And they will last only one time because people will see that they are different from what they are presenting themselves. They are in it for profit, for money, for power, and people can see what's happening in Gaza, and they can judge what might happen if this model was replicated in Egypt. The last point that I want to make is commenting on the absence of sexual harassment. That is indeed a very, very, very positive change. And I really, I'm full of love for these young men and women, and I think they deserve our aid more than Mubarak does. And so I don't know whether any of my colleagues on the panel would like to add something to this, or whether we should start getting questions from the floor. So, go ahead. Please line up behind him, and because it's being recorded also.
I heard that there were large strikes a couple years ago in the textile industry, and it's my understanding that some of the youth groups that have been involved in organizing these recent demonstrations were inspired by those strikes and were in solidarity with the workers. I was wondering if you could speak to whether there are strikes happening currently, and what the Egyptian working class or textile workers in particular, how they're responding.
Should we answer now?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of people are, are looking at it as purely a Cairean phenomenon, above all. I see a lot of, speculations in the media. Oh, well, it's just these people in Midan al-Tahrir, that's not all of Egypt. But you're right to point out that there were strikes all across Egypt. In 2008, which led to the April 6th movement. I think many of you hear about the April 6th movement. It's kind of orchestrated or helped organize these strikes. And then when the Khalid Said affair happened 2 years later, the April 6th, and so right now we have a youth movement on these media that are able to orchestrate these events very quickly. I read a really wonderful article for those who are trying to kind of make heads and tails of who the players are and what are the social forces that could be part of it that are actually underlying this problem. Who are those people, basically? There's a great article, and when it comes to the labor, it's online. The article is online by Paul Ammar, who's a professor in Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara, I believe. And he spent many years in Egypt. He knows it very, very well. And one of the social forces that he addresses is a coalition of, there are 3 types of NGOs according to him, and one of them is very in solidarity with the feminist and the labor movement. So these tend to be concentrated in the Delta. We don't hear very much about, I would like to know more, maybe it just doesn't come out, but I would really like to know what's happening in the south of Egypt. But it so happens that most of our industries tend to be in the north. When we say the Delta, we're talking about the north of Egypt, and that's where Mahalla is, where this strike was. But that is a different, it's been a while since we've had those. I mean, in the 1950s, we used to have a lot, in the 60s, we used to have a lot of these strikes. And they're very separate from the Muslim Brothers movement. So they're neither exactly like the 50s and 60s labor movements, nor are they like the Muslim Brothers. So it's a kind of new phenomenon. And in 2010, in late 2010, we had a federation of trade unions was established. So we can see more of these kinds of agitations, these labor agitations in the future.
Just a very quick comment to that. Was it 2007, 2008? The Egyptian Interior Minister visited Harvard, and he gave a talk at the Kennedy School, and of course, Egyptian politicians are, received as dignitaries and treated very nicely. Afterwards, he had lunch with some grad students, and they asked him about these demonstrations in Mahalla, because the Egyptian government is basically selectively adopted neoliberal economics, of course, merged with kind of crony capitalism. But they have privatized huge sectors of Egyptian society, which has led to massive unemployment, etc. And so these strikes in Mahalla were going on, and he said, you know what? I'm sick and tired of this topic. If I could take Mahalla and throw it into the sea, I would do it. Right? So that gives you an idea of the kind of deep emotional attachment Egyptian politicians feel for their people.
About 100 kilometers away from the sea, by the way. We've moved it 100 kilometers.
Go ahead, please.
Hi. So Mubarak has justified his... speak? Yeah. Okay. Mubarak has justified his refusal to leave with the fear that there will be a political vacuum in Egypt. And I was wondering if you could speak to the legitimate and illegitimate fear that there could be a political vacuum. And if he were to leave, who, would it be Omar Suleiman or someone like that, would be able to lead a reconstruction of the government to a proper democracy that the people would want? Thank you.
I can assure you that the only reason there is chaos right now is because Mubarak is there, not because of the students sitting peacefully in Maidan al-Tahrir and being attacked. And I have many Egyptian friends, and I don't know where these people keep their horses and camels. I mean, this is the pro-Mubarak movement. There is no shame anymore. Egypt has we have 82 million people. We have very respectable members in the so-called Committee of the Wise, Lajnat al-Hukama, and any one of them could replace Mubarak and run the country very easily until the constitution is changed, and he needs to go, really.
I think that the only vacuum that Mubarak would leave is the corrupt vacuum. Then he will create a clean slate of people. People has provided the world with intellectual leaders and inventors, and has led the world, the Arab world in particular, culturally. Historically, if you just touch upon the history of Egypt, Egypt is very rich. Egypt is a fertile land to produce people who can lead the world, not only Egypt. What happened during that time, that Mubarak created an aura around him, and what I told the students, created Ba'ba, and I think Ba'ba is the boogeyman, but he created boogeymen. He created a tribe of boogeymen to scare everybody else and to make himself and his regime as the only regime that can guarantee stability and guarantee peace in the area, as if no one else can do it. And I was talking to some of the students here about Mubarak should be given Noah's age in order really to maintain the world for years to come. If he's so scared about us and we're frightened that if he goes, the whole world would collapse, does he have a guarantee from God he would never go? God gave him a permission to live forever. One day he will go. Then what will happen? Then we really have to think rationally that there is nothing irreplaceable, and there is no regime irreplaceable, and there is no stability that's irreplaceable, and that's only the fear that Mubarak Mubarak succeeded in creating in ourselves, and in the West in particular, and in the United States in more particular.
Please. Could you speak loudly so that people in the back can hear you, please?
Okay. Is this loud enough?
This is wonderful.
Okay. I just want to, I'm an Egyptian student and I want to speak on the behalf of the Egyptian youth because I think what we needed even before the revolution, that we needed a kind of a national project that will unite all the Egyptians in a certain way. So in the 50s, we had the national project. We had the high dam, we had the industry, all of this. And in the 70s, we had the war and something that united Egyptians. And since 73, we don't have any kind of Egyptian, if we can say a national project that will unite the people. And when we speak about sexual harassment, when we speak about the people cheering up for the national team after the African Cup, this is all a kind of energy. And energy is neither created nor destroyed, but it changes from one form to another. So when we see people, there is no sexual harassment in the demonstrations. This is because this energy of the sexual harassment in the youth that they used against the women is now directed for something beneficial, is directed for their country to change the political system. So I think this is a kind of a national movement, and this is a national project. The democracy is a national project now in Egypt that youth wants to have.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very constructive comment. The next person, please. And again, speak loudly.
Yeah, so my question has to do, well, it's related to reports that I've heard about the Tunisian government since their upheaval. I heard there are still vestiges of corruption that are still present within the government community, including secret police, several other things, like upper-class members of the economy still support the corrupt ways of the old government because they were deriving benefits from those ways. Maybe can you shed any light on how those kinds of issues will be dealt with, even with the chance of free and fair election in Egypt following this turmoil?
Well, I think even as we are speaking, the Attorney General or his equivalent in Egypt has frozen the assets of many of these very corrupt people and prevented them, or has issued an order preventing them from leaving the country. So I think that there is response to some of the needs, and these are not new demands, by the way. I mean, we all remember kifaya, which means it's enough, and that started at least 10 years ago, 15 years ago. People were saying, we've had enough. And I'm not saying that corruption will end overnight, either in Egypt or in Tunisia, but at least if you make it more difficult to steal, it might bring about these financial, economic reforms and democratic reforms. So, yes, go ahead.
I'd just like to say there was a good historical kind of article in the Washington Post yesterday by a professor called Larry Diamond, in which he was giving advice to Egypt. This is what you should do. I mean, as an academic, not as a policymaker. And one of the things he said is make sure the old order is actually gone. And he gave the example of Ceausescu's Romania, where it was very quick. Within 3 days, he was gone. We're way behind him. Within 3 days of the upheaval, and then he was executed. Nevertheless, the person who came after him was even worse than him. So you have to make sure that you kind of uproot them very well. But then he also makes the point that you don't need to kill them all. And he gives the example of Iraq, that when you start eliminating all of the Ba'ath, that backfired and it created an ongoing chaos. So I think you have to be careful at this stage what you do and what you don't do. But I think it's very pleasing to see that the economically corrupt most of them. I mean, I think we all heard the reports of Mubarak having $40 billion, just mind-boggling in a country that's a developing country. I think you're right to point out that it has to be uprooted, but it has to be done in a way that's actually in sync with Egyptian history. I mean, if you look at the '52 revolution, our last revolution, where we went from monarchy to the current kind of military authoritarian system, the king was not touched. I mean, he was put on a boat and sent on his yacht, his own yacht, from his palace in Rasitin in Alexandria, and he went to Italy, which is his favorite country. That's great. I mean, if you have to be overthrown, that's not bad. So, and the whole system was dismantled, but without necessarily without executions, but with great harm to their financial.
Thank you.
I mean, to add something to that, I think there are still a lot of debates about what the depth of this transformation is going to be. I mean, the U.S. keeps emphasizing this stable transformation, and everybody here who's excited about this says, "Oh yeah, transformation," but they seem to be stressing primarily the stable. So if they can get Mubarak, who isn't called Mubarak, who might be called Omar, for example, Omar Suleiman, then they are happy with that. And at least that's how it seems. And even these so-called negotiations that are going on right now, it doesn't seem to be quite clear what they are about. The way the vice president puts it is basically, oh yes, we are this fatherly state, and we have heard you, the youth, and we're going to make some modifications to the system. As long as it fits with the constitution, then he has long list of possible things that might go. Of course, we don't want to violate the constitution, and there's so many rules and regulations, etc. While the demonstrators say, hold on a second, your system is corrupt. The system has to go. It's not like you can decide what stays, what goes. This is meant to be a revolution. So it's very much. It's not that the revolution has succeeded and now everybody knows, oh, we have to start anew. There is still a system that still insists that it's legitimate, that still says the president is legitimate because he's been elected. Yeah, well, so these questions haven't been answered, and a lot of people haven't taken sides, and also internationally have not taken sides, what this transformation actually should mean, how deep it should go. And so it's obviously still early days to see what will happen.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsy, for saying what you just said, because it segues into the comment that I would like to make. And it's a comment, not a question, but I hope that my friend Dr. Farouk would let me do that. I'm an Egyptian American. I'm a professor of engineering at Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a university 15 minutes to the north of here. And I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to you that there are other universities in Chicago. But I first want to tell you of a funny thing that happened, and I'll make it very quick. On my way here to speak to what Dr. Eissa was saying, that it is really, there's this surreal feeling around, and he doesn't know where he is. As I was driving in, turning onto 59th Street on the bus stop, there was a big sign in Arabic. And I looked at it and I thought, where am I now? Am I in Egypt or am I in Cairo? And the sign was giving guidelines on how to prevent the spread of influenza. So I drove a little closer and it said, the city of Chicago on top. And then I said, okay, I know where I am. Why is there a flu poster in Arabic there? Maybe these professors in the class are spreading influenza somewhere. So watch out for that. But what I want to address is democracy and the necessity of our unyielding commitment to democracy. And you talked about the transition. And in the transition, we need to stress that democracy stays. For years and years, I have been hearing people saying, on the news and in the media and every place, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. And I would be irritated by that, but I had to just accept it and acquiesce and agree. I don't agree with the policies of Israel, but I agree that Israel has a democratic system to elect its Knesset and to elect its prime minister. And this was being said in a little bit of a derogatory way. We were faulting these countries for not having a democratic system. Today, we cannot fault him for wanting democracy. We have to actually applaud that the people of the Middle East, in Tunisia and in Egypt and Jordan and other places, want to pursue democracy. Am I afraid that this experiment will actually be hijacked by anybody? Of course I am, because it has happened historically. Lots of revolutions have had good intentions and were hijacked. And the only way we can prevent from the hijacking is, as Americans, to insist that the change is democratic and that there is broad representation in a transitional government, like President Obama said a couple of days ago. Today, they're not saying broad representation. We need to push and say broad representation. All the opposing figures have to be included in the change. If this ends up in the Muslim Brotherhood taking over the country, yeah, that would be a disaster. But if it turns out that we get a democratic government, and then in that democratic government, the people elect a parliament that has a majority of Muslim Brotherhood, I would be very dissatisfied, but it would be okay. It would be exactly as if, for example, in the next election, we find that the Tea Party has taken the majority in the Congress, for example. That would be a problem. But it's something that can stay for one term, and then people can reverse that. So please insist that the change in Egypt has a broad representation, it includes everybody, and that it has to be democratic. There has to be a change to democracy, not to stability that masks underneath it the same corruption that we have seen all along. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please.
That was very good.
So I wanted to thank our panel for contributing their professional and personal insights into this current, I guess some would call it a crisis, but others would call it an opportunity that's happening in Europe, and I appreciate that. I was hoping you'd let me ask two quick questions, actually. The first one was regarding, you mentioned, Farouk, was this council of wise men that is sort of guiding the transition in Egypt. I've read a little bit about them in the news, and I think there's maybe some personal connections to these people on this panel. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about them, because this is something that we're not really seeing in the Western media, and I'd like to know a lot more about the personalities behind who's guiding, who are these new guiding forces, other than seeing, Al-Baradei coming up here and the Muslim Brotherhood coming up there, but sort of this group of insiders, I guess, who are guiding this transition. The second question I had was regarding what you also mentioned, with the issue of the peace treaty with Israel. It seems to be in my understanding that no one is really interested in dying in Sinai anytime in the future, but I was wondering if you had any general sense of what Egyptians are saying about this, and whether this is even an issue that we should be worrying about, because it seems to me that maybe it's not.
Thank you. I'll answer the second one first and leave it to my colleagues to. There are very strong rumors that Mubarak himself gave the orders to burn the gas wells and the gas pipeline in Sinai. And the symbolism is quite obvious. He is threatening that this is what you will get if I go. But nobody from by the way, the wise men are not negotiating. They are just intervening between the demonstrators and public opinion, so to speak. And they're all industrialists. Some are lawyers, some are columnists, some are just, and none of them would be interested in running for office or hijacking the revolution or any of these things. And this is needed really to change the constitution and to have free election. That's all we are saying, really. Let's have free election.
If I can tell you what their proposal is, but let me tell you first that I have a reservation with, the problem is you don't want at this stage too many players, because that detracts from the momentum of the people who have created this. The only thing that's scaring the regime, the only thing that's giving us hope for change is what's happening in Midan al-Tahrir, in Alexandria, in Suez, So I'm just kind of looking at it from a distance. I think it detracts from the momentum, and it opens possibilities that need not be opened. I mean, from the point of view of this interim Sulaiman and that clique. So I think a little bit, I would say they're out of touch with the pulse of what's happening in the country. Their proposal is an intelligent one. Unfortunately, this is not the time for those proposals because this kind of for anything to succeed now, it has to have the stamp of approval of the people who've created this movement, and they're not speaking on their behalf. Yeah. But their proposal suggests that I think it was actually a surprise to me. I thought that if the president dies or resigns or goes to Sharm el-Sheikh, that the vice president would take his place, but apparently not. According to our constitution, it would be the Speaker of the Parliament, Fathi Srour, who is just in the same mud as Hosni Mubarak, so it's not a big improvement. So the proposal of this group of wise people suggests that Mubarak, so the idea is how to get an interim, a legitimate interim government. So he would deputize Sulaiman to serve as president. If the current president deputizes Sulaiman to be president, then you can buy time to actually create constitutional reform. So it's some of them are constitutional lawyers. Okay, they're looking at it academically, but I think it's bigger than that. I think this is too detailed for the moment, and I think they're kind of robbing the momentum away from the others.
There is an irony here. There is an irony because the people who led that movement were the young youth, enthusiastic, using social media, and they succeeded in mobilizing people. The unfortunate thing, they have not appointed anybody to speak on their behalf at the beginning. They did not declare anything to claim any victory or agenda, as we talk about. So many people joined in because the gathering succeeded. So the Council of Wise Men, in fact, works as a conduit to listen to them. What do you want out of this? And they relate that to whoever is in power or can do something about the situation. In fact, they are trying to be a buffer zone to create a unity that would not steal that movement from those young people. And today, when I was listening to the young man from Google, they call him Wael Google, he is the marketing, Google marketing in the Middle East, and he's coming from a very well-to-do family. He doesn't need any money or any position out of that. They led that movement because they got fed up. They want to do something. And they did it, but they didn't have any claim to anything. So what the wise men did, really, they listened to them. And the other night we listened, Fuad was with me and Dr. Omar Khalil. We were watching a more than 1 hour interview with 3 of the wise men. Why? One of them was Noha's father, Dr. Abu al-Magd, Ahmed Kamal Abu al-Magd, and one of them was specialized in constitutional law, and the other one was a physician who had long history in being a speaking out against the regime and for the welfare of people. And that conversation really highlighted so much because we are confused. We don't know what's going on, what this council is doing. We see the names. We know some of these names are very credible people. We don't know the others. But that interview, that 1 hour, explained a lot, at least for me. It told me really exactly they listened to the youth and they wanted to meet with Omar Suleiman, and they took one youth with them to speak on their behalf and the elder to be there. And they spoke in a way that I've never heard anyone speaking about the regime in that blunt way, an accusation, and talking direct about what kind of environment the regime created to really scare everyone not to express themselves. But this time, what was soothing, what was really assuring me personally, was the way they spoke and the clarity with which they expressed the young people's opinions, which the young people could not really express the way the wise men do it. So the wise men really hold that, connect the past to the present, and reading the young people's minds and relating this. They do provide a direction, they do provide a vision, but the future, in fact, is not in their hands or in anybody else's hands. It's in the stamina of people in Tahrir Square how long it will take them to stay there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eissa. Yes, please.
Can I just make a short comment just on on the Israel question, because that hasn't been addressed at all? I think that the problem is, I mean, the problem that already the English had when they were the colonial power in Egypt is, well, on the one hand, you want to allow, elections and whatever, but then what happens if those people choose to elect somebody you don't like? That's a real problem. And then you are faced with the question: what do you actually want more? Do you actually want control, or do you want to, do you actually want your interests to trump, or your ideals? And the way Hosni Mubarak kept himself in power for the last 30 years is that he was a client of the United States. So he, with regards to foreign policy, he did whatever the U.S. said, whatever. He was just really obedient client. But internally, he could do whatever he wanted to. So that was the kind of deal. And that's really predictable. And that's the kind of predictableness that American foreign policy wants to maintain. If we actually have a real democracy in Egypt, then you have what you have, a real democracy, and it's not predictable. And that's just the nature of it. And then you can ask, but what if people decide, what if? I mean, what if the United States to decide something to elect some crazy person in next year? Do you think Egypt would have the right to intervene here and to change that? I don't think you would. So, I mean, that's democracy. It is kind of a chaotic thing. Sorry, that was my
Please go ahead.
comment.
Thank you. My question may be premature at this point, but I guess I'm very concerned about the process. And one of the people on the committee, on the panel up there, brought out the fact that it is indeed not the vice president, but the head of parliament who would take over once Mubarak resigns. And then the problem is, of course, you've got to change the constitution, because right now it's written so that it really does set up this authoritarian regime, which some call a dictatorship. So, but again, the parliament isn't going. I can't imagine that the current parliament is going to approve the changes in the constitution that need to be made, because it's in their self-interest in order to keep the constitution as it is. So I guess I'm just wondering, there's so much process that has to be done in order to really get free and fair elections. Do you think that the youth who have started this have the staying power in the country to keep this going and to keep the pressure on to get all of these changes made that need to be done in order to have these free and fair elections? Thank you.
Thank you. Did you expect her answer?
Yes.
I don't think that it will take such a long time. I think that within he claims, Hosni Mubarak claims that it's a constitution and that it cannot be changed. He himself has changed it several times. That's a myth. And it's not a very good constitution, by the way. It has self-contradictory articles, such as freedom of religion and thought, etc., and at the same time, Egypt is an Islamic country. What happens if you're not a Muslim under the constitution? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I...
No, but the Constitution doesn't say the citizens of Egypt have to be Muslim.
It says it's an Islamic country, which means that whoever is not a Muslim is not really in Egypt.
About the reform of the Constitution, I mean, there are a few articles in the Constitution that many have agitated to change, and I really don't see this as I don't see it as something that's going to face a lot of resistance. We have a very strong lawyer syndicate, a very independent lawyer syndicate. We have a lot of lawyers and judges that are just waiting. And the only challenge was Mubarak being there. One of the key things that they want to get rid of is the emergency law, which has been there since 1981. Another part of the Constitution they want to remove is the open-ended terms for the president. to two. They want to limit it to two 6-year terms. And I don't think there's much resistance at all, except on his part. So I don't think this will be a big challenge.
Please, we are getting close to.
I have a very quick,
But
open-ended
could you
question. Yes.
shout?
I'm sorry. As Egyptian, I'm sort of curious what you think the role of the United States government or the international community should be, both now and also in assisting sort of transformations to democracy. Whether you think there should be any, or what it should be.
Egyptians speak.
Just stay with us. يسقط حسني مبارك. The fall of Mubarak.
Well, it could involve just a very quick telephone call from Barak to Mubarak, say to him, "Khalas, it's finished."
Hosni, come for lunch.
Yes.
I think it's important to keep in mind, I mean, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, 2 years ago, called Hosni Mubarak and his wife personal friends of the Clinton family. And when Barack Obama wanted to send a special envoy to Egypt, he chose a former American diplomat to Egypt and sent him there. Frank Wiesner? Weisner? No, Weisner, I think, right? Anyway, who turns out to be working for a firm that lobbies for the Egyptian government in Washington. So this does not seem to me that there is any kind of strong pressure there, I mean, to start with, to question anything of the status quo. I think there is absolutely no, why should they change it? I mean, like, there's no interest to change anything of the system. There's actually interest to change as little as possible. All right, you obviously, there was no objection to all these rigged elections. There wasn't any. Condoleezza Rice gave a talk 2005, I think, in Cairo, where she was very critical. But they forgot about it as soon as Hamas was elected in Gaza. And thought, oh, maybe this is wrong. Maybe it was a bad idea. Maybe these people have to be, ruled by force and whatever. Maybe we can convert him to some sort of fatherly kind of figure rather than a evil dictator. But I don't think the U.S. has to do. Crusade for democracy. I think it's enough if they were just to stop supporting it.
Thank you, Ahmed. Please.
I have another as Egyptian question. As Egyptians, how does it feel when news outlets and pretty much anyone tries to compare what's going on in Cairo to the Iranian Revolution of 1979?
You mean the Iranian elections and the...
No, 79.
Oh, 79. I don't think that that's comparable in the sense that we don't have a clear ideology that's behind these young people. And they are emphasizing the secular aspect of it rather than the Islamic State aspect. So I wouldn't compare it. Yeah. They would love to follow the model of Turkey, to have a democracy, but if they have some Islamists who are willing to share power, who are willing to rotate power, who are willing to, it doesn't matter. There's the Christian democratic parties in Europe, but it has to be transparent. It has to be a democracy. So, go ahead.
So you guys were referencing this as an economic revolution, and I was wondering, I just got an email today from a friend in Egypt who was saying that this wasn't like Mahdi, but she was saying there's lines in front of the banks, but nothing else has changed. So how will this revolution change the day-to-day life, maybe not just of the Cairenes, but people in the Delta?
I think it has to evolve over time. A lot of the crimes of the current regime are economic. The way it's prioritized their investments at the expense of national industries, favoring always Chinese or whatever Western. Luckily we have a class of native capitalists like we did in the early part of the 20th century that was very, very involved in uplifting the country economically. The peasants in agricultural areas. Egypt was, the breadbasket of the ancient world. It has the Nile. It has one of the most fertile, and it's just heartbreaking to see the demise of Egyptian agriculture. That was our wealth. So a lot of the peasants, every time I go to Egypt, there are shows on television that just grip me very much when they line up these peasants who are just making such basic complaints. So the priorities of the government were not conducive to extracting the wealth of Egypt and encouraging people to create real industries. No, it became a consumer culture. You import everything from outside. So there's a lot of, I think there's potential for a huge economic development just by changing the economic philosophy of the regime. But by the way, this revolution, I hope you don't come away with the notion that we are presenting it as an economic purely one, but it's one that's really insisting on root political transformation.
But there is, to give you a concrete example, I spoke to my father today about one of the sources of wealth of the ruling family and their friends is basically manipulating prices of agricultural products and forcing farmers to sell very cheaply and then selling relatively high prices in the market. And this was something that was not questioned. These prices these farmers got was basically not questioned. And I spoke to my father today, and he said, just in the last 2 weeks, you can see people becoming so involved and so interested, and there's so many discussions of what actually, about this problem and insisting that they get fair prices for their products. So in the sense, I think that there are a lot of, pardon? Well, we haven't had a major harvest yet. The spring harvest hasn't been brought in, but small products that are harvested on a continuous basis. That's what he observed.
One last question or comment.
Question.
Tfaddal.
I want to ask a question which I think everybody has in mind, which is what is going to happen next. I think everybody is curious about it, and I'm sure you also are curious about what's going to happen next. But what are the possible scenarios you are thinking of to happen likely within the coming months or so? Or what is your own personal opinion for all panelists?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Do I have a fortune teller here? The worst scenario, I think, gives the way to what's happening next. There is what we think rationally and what we think emotionally. What we like to happen next, that this man shorten the agony and just do something that would relieve the tension, and the country will pick up. Egypt has survived so many catastrophes before and is capable to survive that as well. But the other scenario, if he would be allowed to stay, if he is insisting, and the Carpenter Guild, in fact, was asking Mr. Mubarak about what kind of glue he uses to glue him to the chair, to the seat, because they are looking, that's very, very good kind of glue. And if he stays until his term comes over and so whatever, they want quick steps right now to delegate his authority to the vice president and start the reformation immediately. Because constitutionally, the vice president does not have any power according to the item 82 that was amended in 2007. And if he, according to another item in the institution, he can delegate his authority to the vice president. And there were some rumors about if he would claim health problems, for example, and go to Germany for treatment, which he did before delegate his authority to the prime minister when he was under anesthesia, operated on in Germany. If something like that happens, then the vice president, he didn't have a vice president at the time, but now he has a vice president, and that vice president can have all the legitimacy to dissolve the parliament, call for a new election, free, under judges and whatever this parliamentary can produce, and then amend the constitution in his absence. That will take, in fact, more than the time till September. And this is what some of people in Egypt really are propagating now, saying the man is old, give him some dignity, let him live in peace, and let him do something like that there. But is he willing to do that? This is the big question, because the man is using the best kind of glue, and we don't know really if he is willing to do any of these things.
Other members of the panel?
Well, I find it hard to disentangle forecasts with wishful thinking. Like, I'm just buried in the wishful thinking. And I, get some hope from the fact that since the 70s, we've actually had states come out of these turmoils with democracy. In fact, we've had over 60 states were able to kind of midwife a democratic system through this kind of turmoil. So I'm hopeful that Egypt would be like, Eastern Europe in the late 80s, and not like what it was in the 50s, just another military autocratic system. But I think because we've done that already, and because Iran has done the Islamic thing, I'm hopeful that with those models to kind of, as a negative model, that would gear the elements. But it would have to take steadfastness vis-a-vis Suleiman and those people.
Yeah, 1952 wasn't a real revolution. It was an aborted revolution. And I think it had terrible effects on Egyptian society, Egyptian everything, economy, intellectual life. And I fear, my fear is that something like this would be repeated again. I think what is needed is truth. There needs to be there first needs to be truth before there's reconciliation. We can't just bury this and say, oh, well, Mubarak, he's like our father. Let's give him a dignified exit out. 300 people have been killed just in the last 2 weeks. And this wasn't an accident. This wasn't warfare with two people fighting against each other. These were, demonstrators who were, we have videos of several of these occasions. They were murdered. And there has to be some truth there, first of all. Accounting, not just some scapegoats, their assets are seized, but actually proper accounting, where people stay in the country and their finances are checked, and a process in that way that actually light is shown into these dark areas and not some new myths being propagated. That's not.
I would just, I think my hope is, and one of the sort of hopeful elements that I see in this, going back to some of the comments and questions that were made earlier, I think sometimes in our own public discourse in America and as Americans, and certainly in our media, we tend to sometimes veer to very shallow explanations or look for very shallow explanations of what's happening. And so to make the comparison to Iran, or to say, is this the version of sort of a secular revolution, or is this the Iranian revolution? I think what you see on the ground with this kind of nascent political culture shows that it's actually something quite different, something maybe quite more sophisticated, where you do have a woman in niqab saying we want a secular state, and you do have the Muslims and Christians in Egypt coming together for a common political vision. I think there's actually maybe something quite fascinating, something quite unprecedented going on there. So my hope is that nascent political culture is able to develop and able to have an influence on these renegotiations of state power, and that we may see something quite amazing from that. My fear is that there could be a sort of good old-fashioned crackdown, as has already been sort of attempted, and that that this movement could sort of be put to rest for quite some time.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for your patience with us. Thank you.